The presentation of the agenda. The agenda was properly posted, I believe, and I'm going to ask that we move the special reports up after the approval of minutes so that the presentation can be done prior to going through our resolutions. Could we have a motion to approve as with that change? A motion by Enigal and a second by Jeancourt. Any discussion on the motion for approval of agenda? If not, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is carries. In the correspondence, there was a email from Christine Reed regarding the Forceville Mill Pond. I hope all of you has had an opportunity to see that. I will be talking with Corporation Counsel and see if it's something that needs to be agenda on the land conservation agenda. Sorry. Okay. Supervisor Shaw. You've had.
Yes, I just wanted to make a request that we do move this to LLC. The Reeds have been emailing and have clearly the Friends of the Forestville Dam are concerned about this. There's a lot of folks that have been reaching out about this specific issue for a long time. So I'd really like to see this move to committee so we can actually get something actionable done on this.
Okay. That would be fine with you, Grant. Yes. Okay. Okay. The approval of the minutes of the December 17th meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, public comment. Okay, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to make a public comment at this time? Seeing no indication, are there any people online, Ken?
Sure. So for those online, if you'd like to raise your hand and I can give you the floor. So I'll ask twice if you'd like to speak. And for the second time, is there anyone who'd like to speak? And with that, we will then continue on with the meeting.
Okay, the minutes of the December 17th, 2024 meeting was in the packet. Could we have a motion to approve those? Okay, there is a motion by Supervisor Shaw and a second by Supervisor Vogel. Any corrections or additions to those minutes? Hearing nothing, all those in favor of approval signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes stand approved. And then we'll move the special report with Cheryl Stevenson. No, Greg, do you need to do any introduction for us or Ken? Okay.
Well, hello everyone. It's nice to be back here. I thank you for the opportunity to update you all on what we've done since I was last up here in January of last year. For those of you who may not remember, I'm Cheryl Stevenson. I'm a professional geologist in the state of Wisconsin, and I work with GZA Geoenvironmental, and we're conducting this emergent contaminant screening on behalf of the county. So I'll go through the results today for sampling that we've done in spring 2024 and fall of 2024. I do have quite a number of slides to get through today, but in lieu of time, I'll spend more time on some slides and less time on others. But I certainly will open up for discussion at the end. So in the interest of time, I'll jump straight into our spring 2024 well selection. And when it came to our spring sampling, we really had two primary objectives for conducting the sampling. The first objective was to conduct another broad sweep across the county, in which we resampled all of our wells that we sampled in fall of 2023. And this was really to evaluate that well's response to recharge. As you can see from the USGS well log of a well in Kewaunee County, the blue line represents the groundwater elevation during those times. When we sampled in fall of 2023, it was during a dry spell, so we had a lot lower groundwater elevations. And then we had all of that rain in spring that resulted in more recharge and an increase in our groundwater elevations. So we just wanted to take another look at those fall 2023 wells to see if there was any changes in analytes in response to recharge. And I will say that with increased precipitation, you may more likely get increased infiltration of surface contaminants into the subsurface below. But in certain areas where that leaching may not be taking place, you can also get a dilution effect. So in response to recharge, you may see results go up or down. And I believe we do see both of those in our data set that I'll go through today. So we sampled all of the wells in fall 2023 for the CM analytes that were sampled previously. With the addition of 3 analytes, we looked at personal care products and pharmaceuticals in a smaller number of wells. We looked at microplastics, and then we looked at nitrogen and phosphorus pesticides. So the second objective was to conduct more localized sampling, where we sampled additional wells in areas with specific fall 2023 detections. Specifically, we looked at one area where arsenic was above that health standard of 10. We looked at additional wells in areas where nitrate was 8 milligrams per liter or above, and that's just encroaching that health standard of 10. And then we looked at 4 areas where PFAS was detected at 1 nanogram per liter or more. And I will say that 3 of these 4 areas that we looked at for PFAS, we were only looking at again because there was detections in fall, not that there was detections above any health standards. And I'll just take a moment to recognize our UW Green Bay collaboration. We worked with a student under Dr. John Luchai. She collected some isotope samples for some wonderful research that they're doing at UW Green Bay. The data is handled for and paid for separately, so I'll not talk on behalf of their research, but we did rely on Dr. John Luchai for some interpretation of some arsenic levels that we were seeing that I'll go through today. So I'll not go through this slide in detail, but I just wanted to pop this slide up there to show how many samples were collected for each analyte. And then the 4 analytes at the bottom, I don't have slides on today, but I'll just briefly discuss. The reason I'm not going to go through them in slides is because they were either detected in normal ranges, they weren't detected at all, or they were detected at a similar concentration that was below standards. And so, for example, I want to just mention the NMP pesticides here because it was an additional analyte that I just discussed in the previous slide. But we did sample 3 wells with previous positive DACT screening from fall of 2023, and there was no detections of these pesticides in those wells. So with our 2 sampling objectives in spring, we ended up sampling 103 wells in the first week of June. The well location, the spatial distribution across the county is shown in that map there, and the municipality representation is shown in the table. When it came to our sampling methodology, we pretty much used the same protocol as fall 2023, where we implemented a clean hands, dirty hands method specific to collecting PFAS, and that's just to prevent any cross-contamination. We did have 2 teams of 2 just to make sure we covered all of these samples in a shorter sampling period, so it was all collected in the same week. And because we were working a lot with the fall 2023 homeowners, they were all pre-scheduled appointments because we had those contacts in place. However, for the localized sampling, we did have to do some additional public outreach in terms of mailers to the homes, and where they may not have responded to those mailers, we did conduct some door-to-door calls to see if they would be interested in the sampling and just to kind of educate them on what we're doing. And I will just say here with the results of the localized sampling, such as the results and the well depth and that well location in relation to the target well that we, from fall 2023, it was all dependent solely on who was home and not really, ideal design per se, or who responded to our mailers. So when it comes to interpreting our results, since I was last up here, the EPA has finalized their drinking water standards for 5 PFAS. So PFOS and PFOA now have an individual standard of 4 nanograms per liter. 3 additional PFAS have a standard of 10 nanograms per liter. And then there is a way of calculating a hazard index where there may be 2 or more PFAS present in a well. I will say that we're using this EPA standard. The DNR currently relies on the Department of Health standard of 20. So just keep that in mind as we go through these results. And then the remaining, I also will say, due to the limited size on the slides, I am just showing the results for PFAS that have groundwater quality standards associated with them. So, and then I will say that the rest of the results that are not PFAS will be compared to NR 140 groundwater quality standards, which is the enforcement standard in the PAL. The enforcement standard is really the maximum allowable concentration in groundwater. and it's equivalent to the safe drinking water standards of NR 809. The PAL is also shown. It's really just a smaller percentage of the ES, and it's mostly used in facility design, but I just wanted to show both of these in our slides moving forward so that you have some reference for the groundwater quality. So moving on to, I'm going to go through our broad sweep sampling results first and then go through our localized. So to start, I'll talk about PFAS. We sampled 96 wells for PFAS. The location of these wells are shown in the triangle locations. Of these 96 wells that we sampled, 18 of the wells had detections of PFAS. 12 of these detections were less than the EPA standards, and they're shown in the blue color. And then 6 wells did have detections that were above the EPA standards, and those are shown in red. So you can see just north and south of Sturgeon Bay there, and then we have one red color up at north of Northern Door. And so if you look at these results, it varies from wells that have PFAS concentrations that are just marginally above these EPA standards. And these wells likely represent groundwater that may or may not be above the standards depending on the time of year that you sample. It likely isn't consistently above these standards because they are straddling it. But then we are starting to see some results like DC 187 where we're into the multiple of 10s for PFAS, and these areas likely represent, or these wells likely represent areas where groundwater may be consistently above those standards. For nitrate, we sampled 95 wells for nitrate. 71 of these wells had detections. 41 of the wells are below standards. 27 of the wells had detections above PAL, which is shown in the yellow. Again, this is still below the ES. And then we only had 3 wells that had detections above that enforcement standard of 10, which is pretty similar to the fall of 2023. The concentrations that we're seeing, again, are still very close to that enforcement standard number. They are in exceedance, but there's nothing that we're seeing that's, alarmingly above those concentrations, or above those standards. For arsenic, we sampled 63 wells. 12 of those wells had detections. 7 of the detections were below the health standards. 4 wells were above the PAL, and we had 1 well that was above the detection, or 1 well that was above the ES. And this 1 well is represented by 2 samples because 2 homes share a well. And DC 69 had a similar arsenic concentration in fall of 2023. So by sampling DC 69 and DC 206, we were able to kind of compare, did this arsenic concentration have anything possibly to do with the specific pumps, or the specific well infrastructure, piping, things like that, or was it more likely to do with, representative of the groundwater concentration? And you can see that the concentrations return very similar at levels 3 times the ES. So this is certainly a detection that we look into further with our localized sampling. For bacteria, we sampled 68 wells for bacteria. 6 wells had detections. Any detections at all are considered above any kind of standards, and so they're shown in yellow. Similar to fall of 2023, all of our detections were recorded in Northern Door, where we have more shallow bedrock. We sampled for DACT screen similar to fall of 2023, and this really looks at the likelihood of herbicides existing in a well above any kind of health standards. And the DACT screen is just a cheaper method of looking at the breakdown product instead. It was developed by UW-Stevens Point. And so we sampled 76 wells for the DACT screen. 3 of the wells came back with detections, which is similar to fall of 23. Actually, 2 of the CM wells came back with detections. However, the levels that we were recording in those wells, based on UW-Stevens Point's interpretation, did not indicate that herbicides would exist in those wells above any kind of health standard. So then moving on, we sampled 10 wells for personal care products and pharmaceuticals. We preferentially sampled wells that had previous indications of impairment, such as elevated nitrate, coliform detections, PFAS detections, things like that. This analysis looks at about 6 different personal care products and pharmaceuticals, things like sweetener, caffeine, antibiotics. And so 2 wells shown in yellow returned with positive hits for 2 sweeteners and 1 antibiotic. And so this indicates that the groundwater in the area of these wells is definitely under the influence of human influence, such as septic. So then we sampled 10 wells for microplastics, shown in the locations in the yellow triangles. All 10 wells came back with detections. As you can see, the detections vary. They range from 36.12 microplastic particles per liter up to 4,500 in the north of Northern Door. There are no national or international standards for microplastics. It's the definition of an emerging contaminant. There are not many studies, particularly with underground systems. So we didn't have a lot to reference our results to. However, we did notice that obviously one well is an order of magnitude above the rest. And so we wanted to look further into that in our fall 2024 sampling event. So I am skipping microplastics for now, and I'll go back to that when I discuss our fall sampling. So that was our broad sweep sampling results. I'm going to go into our localized sampling. This localized sampling was done at the same time as the broad sweep, and this again is based off fall 2023 detections. And so when it came to looking at nitrate areas, 10 of our 95 wells that we sampled were for further localized sampling in 3 areas. The 3 areas were chosen based on their fall 2023 results. As you can see, 2 of those results were above the ES and 1 was just slightly below it. So starting with area 1, let's skip forward. Sorry. Area 1, we looked at DC 61. Again, we were able to sample DC 61 and we only had 1 homeowner response in this area, so we only sampled 2 wells. There are no information on well depths, but you can see that DC 202 was in the apparent down gradient direction. Our results in spring of 2024 returned a lot lower at 3.4 compared to 10.2 in fall, and the DC 202 had a result that was below the PAL. And so really what this tells us about this area is that there's not a consistent nitrate problem that likely represents fluctuation based on the time of the year. Area 2, we looked at DC 06, which was just below that enforcement standard of 9 in the fall of 23. We resampled DC 06 again and 2 additional wells in that area. These wells were kind of cross gradient from one another at similar depths, and they were directly down gradient of agricultural fields. All 3 returned with pretty elevated nitrate concentrations, one that's above the ES. This well also had previous sample results above the ES when UW Oshkosh looked at it. So these results indicate that agricultural may have an influence on nitrate concentrations in this area. DC 90, it has been it was our highest fall 2023 detection. It was also our highest spring detection, again, just slightly above the ES. We sampled DC 90 again, plus 4 additional wells in that area. As you can see, only DC 90 returned at levels above the ES. Everything else was below the PAL. So that indicates that there's more of a localized issue in this area. If you go to the next slide, this well was one of the ones with the presence of personal care products and pharmaceuticals. There was also some low-level PFAS, and so this likely indicates there's human influence in the groundwater in this area, such as septic, and that person has been informed in their notice. So we had one area where arsenic was above 10, so we sampled 4 wells in this area. Again, we were looking at the fall detection of 27.4 in DC 69. So we sampled the 4 wells below. Again, one of the samples is from the same well. So really we sampled 3 wells in this area. We did have 1 well that returned slightly elevated for nitrate or for arsenic, except it wasn't above the standard, and 1 well that returned below detection. We don't have any well depths in this area. If you skip to the next slide, we did talk to Dr. John Lucha at UW Green Bay about what this may be coming from, and he was discussing one possible avenue to explore was looking at particular sulfide bearing minerals or arsenic bearing sulfide minerals in carbonate rocks that once they're oxidized, they tend to release arsenic into the groundwater and are known to cause arsenic contamination in groundwater. He said if that's occurring, that you typically see an increase in cobalt and nickel alongside the arsenic. We analyzed for these additional metals in all 4 of those wells, and they came back non-detect. So at this time, we can't really rule out an anthropogenic source, but there's certainly more work we'd want to do in this area. And then, as I mentioned before, we sampled 4 areas for PFAS. Again, 3 of these areas were only looked at because the PFAS was detected in fall, and so we wanted to kind of look at what that degree may be in spring. 1 area did have a detection that was above the EPA standards. So starting with area 1, I'll not spend too much time on this because this was the well that had the personal care products and the elevated nitrate. So the PFAS that we're seeing in this well likely is associated with that. The PFAS analytes weren't really identified in the remaining 4 wells in that area. So again, suggests a local issue. DC 43 was just under the value of 2 nanograms per liter. We sampled DC 43 again, and 4 wells in proximity to that well. For the most part, all of the PFAS came back below detection. There was 1 slight detection in this area, but nothing that indicated there was any kind of concern, and so we will not be looking at this area any further. Area 3, we were able to sample DC 32 again, and 1 additional well in this area that was in the apparent down gradient direction. The well in the down gradient direction returned below standards for PFAS. DC 32 returned slightly above, but again, this is one of these wells that may or may not be above the EPA standards depending on the time of year that you sample. 4.7 compared to 4 at the levels that we're looking at really isn't anything that screams there is a massive concern in this area, but it's definitely useful to know that in times of higher recharge, this well may be more susceptible to increased contamination. So area 4, this was looking at additional wells in the area where we had that 1 fall 2023 detection of PFAS above the EPA standards. So we resampled that well, and we sampled 3 additional wells in that area. They were all cross gradient of each other. The well depth kind of varied. And as you can see, the majority of these, all of these returned with at least 1 PFAS that was above the EPA's value. And again, for the likes of DC 187, we're looking at concentrations that likely represent that they're consistently above standards in this area. And so this was an area that we looked at for fall. And so I'm not skipping over this area. I'll just discuss it in more detail as we move on to our fall results. So based on the sampling we did in spring, we had 2 primary objectives for our fall, which was a lot more of a limited sampling event. The first was to take another look at that microplastic value of 4,500 in north of Northern Door. So we resampled that well for microplastics plus 2 wells in that area. We also looked at DC 132 for personal care products and pharmaceuticals because septic is a known contributor to microplastics in the environment. And then in that area of DC 70, DC 187, we sampled 15 wells in that area for PFAS. So I'll start with our microplastic results. 3 wells were sampled. All 3 wells had detections. The detections ranged from 5 to 21 microplastic particles per liter. We did analyze these with a different lab out of California. This lab methodology was chosen because with the levels of microplastics that we were seeing in fall, we wanted to look at the specific microplastics that exist in that well, and this lab allowed identification of that. So the more common plastic that was identified in that well was polycarbonate. Polycarbonate is used in everything. It's in your dishwasher, your coffee machine, your washing machine. And at the levels that were returned to us, it really wasn't as useful at pinpointing any kind of source. But But obviously the elephant in the room is why are these concentrations so significantly different than before? If you want to go to the next slide. This is still somewhat of a mystery to us. I will say that, well, one, we have a very transient aquifer. We know that. But two, there is no standardized lab methodology that's used nationally. It's lab specific. The one that we used for fall 2024 is a sampling method that was developed by the state of California for their public water systems. The lab methodologies differ in terms of in spring, that lab sent us plastic bottles to collect our samples. I spoke to that lab. They said that there should really be no interference with the plastic bottles and the sample results. That's hard to know if that is happening or isn't happening. And in fall, we collected in glass and we saw significantly less microplastics. But another important difference is the minimum particle size difference. In spring, that lab methodology could analyze microplastics all the way down to 6.5 micrometers. For reference, a width of a human hair is 83 micrometers. Whereas in spring, we were looking at microplastics that are above 20. So there is a difference between 6.5 and 20. Based on the literature that I've reviewed, it seems that the smaller the microplastic particle, the more prevalent it is in the well. And so as you start to look at smaller sizes of microplastics, the more likely you are to find it. And so I think we may have missed some of the microplastics that we identified in spring in this fall analysis. I also will say that it's hard to have a reference for other studies when everyone's using different lab methodologies that differ significantly. So I wish I could have a little bit more of a clear, to tell you what's happening here, but until we collect, two samples side by side, it's hard to tell what was causing that discrepancy there. So then when we sampled PFAS, we sampled 15 wells in that area of DC 187. All 15 wells had at least one detection of PFAS. 7 of these detections were above the National Primary Drinking Water regulation. So we're certainly seeing more wells in this area that have exceedances. Again, these results indicate that these may be an exceedance, representative of exceedances year round. The results themselves reduced from spring, which is a good sign that these aren't like ever increasing concentrations that we're looking at. But the results definitely indicate that there was some kind of source in this area that has had more of an area-wide impact to groundwater or contribution to PFAS in groundwater than more of a localized issue. And so we have yet to meet about our goals for the upcoming sampling events. We'll certainly be doing it more on an area-specific basis. We'll no longer be doing any broad sweeps. Of course, arsenic area we'll want to look at more. The PFAS area we'll want to look at more. And just some overall arching comments about the data. We're still pleasantly surprised with what we're seeing in terms of the groundwater quality in Door County. For when I looked at the results based on what percentage was detected out of how much was sampled and what percentage of those detections were above standards, it was actually quite similar to fall. So that indicates that it's kind of similar year round, which is good. Of course, PFAS, we had slightly more concentrations this year in spring, and that was because we were doing more targeted sampling. However, when you're looking at, there's a large agricultural land use here, but the arsenic levels look good. The highest the nitrate levels look good. The highest nitrate levels we've seen were likely due to septic. There's no real concern for pesticides. The DAC screen looked good. And then we do have areas, that we want to look at a little bit further. However, these are limited in number. There's not, hotspots all over the peninsula that we're trying to chase down. We kind of have a good idea of these areas that we want to look at further. So with that, I will open for questions.
Any supervisors have any questions of Cheryl? Supervisor Anagel.
Yeah, just 2 at the moment. When you mention well depth, is that the pump depth or is that the drill depth?
That's the drill depth.
Okay. Cause my pump sits about 222. My well is drilled to 330 plus.
Okay.
So that, I was curious about that aspect of it. The other thing is, and I'm not an expert on the product, so I could have no connection whatsoever. But about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the septic systems started to go to a peanut bag distribution system, piping system inside the mounds and so forth. They're shaped like peanuts. We're all familiar with shipping package peanuts. They look just like that in a package. My question was, has anybody, I don't know what that product is made out of. I'm assuming it's some variation of a plastic. Is there any correlation or any connection or any fact or value to that item?
So we have not looked at that in greater detail, but it's certainly a good thing that to consider. I will say that I think for the microplastics moving forward, we'll definitely want to identify the type. So microplastics can be beads, fibers, films, fragments. I think that may help us. I was looking at 2 studies in karst aquifers. Honestly, like 2 of the only ones that exist, one in Italy and one in Illinois. And the majority of the microplastics they were seeing there is fibers. And so we'll definitely, before we can look at potential sources, we'll want to look at microplastics a little bit further detail, but it's definitely something that we'll consider. And then in response to your pump question, we're really relying on well logs at the moment. I don't believe well logs discuss the pump depth. They just talk about the.
I was presuming you were getting out of the state drilling details. And when you show the ones that don't have any number, that implies that they're quite old.
Yeah, and yes, there's a lot of missing records. There's records up there that are blank. There's records up there with partial information. But as we dive into these areas in the next 2 years, we'll be doing much more of a thorough, kind of talking to the homeowner, maybe some well sounding, things like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anyone else with any questions of Cheryl? No, thank you for your report.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Okay. We'll go back to the order on the agenda, then the county administrator monthly report on operational capital projects.
Sure, I will keep it short, but just for the memo, you can see that it's been updated with most of all the new capital projects that were part of the budget. So those are all listed, I guess, with the current status of where we're at. Obviously, a lot of those are just beginning. And then likewise, the one thing in the I guess what I can call the gifts, grants, and donations, that's just a summary through the end of December. And obviously that will reset. And then the other part of my report is I thought it was worthwhile just also to include the annual report for the transportation program. Mainly the timing, because that's also being provided to the communities, the townships and everything as well, as far as ridership. And I thought it was a good piece of information for you to have. So with that, I will turn it back over. And there's one question.
Okay,
On the report.
Supervisor Enical.
Page 8. The fiber middle mile, which in my mindset has always been like the inner city between our buildings.
Sorry.
Could you repeat that, please?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. There.
So when I was reading that, and I forgive me, but my memory is I thought we had I thought that when we titled this title implies the city neighborhood buildings that we own. What else are we adding buildings, changing buildings? Because I thought we did something like 8 years ago, 5 years ago.
No, when we were talking about the fiber in that part, we were just looking at different. Well, actually, there's 2 parts that were in discussion, and that's why we budgeted for some. One is that many of the communities, obviously, we have, I guess, other county facilities, primarily parks. Did we want to include some of those parks in terms of having those upgrades? So if we worked with a township and there was a cost, was that going to be included? But the other part of that fiber middle mile discussion was really towards our tower project. And if we're going to add towers, do we need to extend fiber to those facilities? A lot of those probably will not, because we're relying on microwave, but there might be some sites that we consider critical in terms of the network once it's finally designed that we actually want to have fiber to for redundancy. So that's why we identified it. And at one time, we had talked about it being middle mile. That's just the term at the time, but to me, it's really part of our fiber infrastructure that ties together our facilities, but also our communications network.
Right. My memory of that title was related to the various buildings back when we started running fiber, and the
Yep.
city worked with us on various items. Okay.
Correct.
So this is really, in general, our fiber network.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? I guess I would have one, Ken, regarding the tower at Fish Creek. Your memo indicates it should be done next month. Is that still on that schedule, and how are we on the budget on that project?
Yes, that project right now, based off our last update, it should be up. What we're trying to do is just work with our providers in terms of being able to take down the equipment and then obviously move it. So based off what we understand, if we can get it all lined up, it should be up and functional by February. Now, should they run into issues with weather or I guess scheduling issues with people being able to climb the tower, that's the only thing that could be the wild card. But the other infrastructure, as far as the fiber is in, the towers there, and everything's ready to go in terms of it going live. It's now just a matter of actually scheduling and again, climbing to one tower to take down our equipment and then moving that and placing it and testing it all. So.
Okay. Any questions from anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to pending business. I have nothing for pending business or updates then. Resolutions. Resolution 2025-01, Supervisor Rubelard.
Approve resolution 2825-01, appointment to the Nicolay Federated Library System Board of Trustees. And I think the library director is here if he wants to make any comments on that.
Sure. Dominic, would you?
Mr. Mike Scoville is our appointee to the library board, and there is often overlap at the system level with library boards. So we feel that this is a good communication route. Good way to transfer information, from the system and back to the library board and vice versa. So we really appreciate Mike volunteering for this position.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, otherwise we have, excuse me, a motion by Supervisor Rubelard, second by Supervisor Norton to appoint Mike Scoville to the Federal Library Board of Trustees with resolution 2025-01. All those in favor of that resolution signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Resolution 2025-02. Roy Engelbert, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve resolution number 2025-02, International Migratory Bird Day, which will be the second Saturday in May. If we want more information, our facility directors here and also our administrator, Ken.
So again, just to give context, again, obviously that's kind of a similar to a proclamation. We had discussion at admin of how we want to handle proclamations moving forward. And I guess what we're trying to do is set like a standard of how we actually consider them. And in this case, this proclamation or this declaration does have an impact on us. Obviously, we're considered bird city, but by actually having this documented within our, county board resolutions, it does impact our facilities and parks in terms of applications they can use for grants. So if you want any further details on the exact grants those are, Wayne can answer that, but that's just a general context of why we're bringing that. But again, just for context though, we are working on, establishing the standard in terms of how we're going to work with proclamations in the future, make sure they have a direct benefit in terms of our operations.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? Okay, otherwise we have a motion by Roy Engelbert, a second by Supervisor Nissa Norton to approve resolution 2025-02. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Okay. Resolution 2025-02, again to Roy, Chairman of the Facilities and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve resolution number 2025-03, which is the County Snowmobile Trail Aid for the 25-26 snowmobile season. This is for the application of the funds for the snowmobile trail.
Okay. Any questions regarding this resolution? Otherwise, there is a motion by Supervisor Roy Engelbert, second by Supervisor Fisher to approve Resolution 2025-03. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And again, Roy, Resolution 2025-04.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve resolution number 2025-04, the approval of community investment grant to the County of Door for new exhibits at the Door County Museum. You notice on line 21, it's a $50,000 grant.
Okay, are there any questions regarding the grant to the museum and the use of it? Seeing no indication, we have the motion by Supervisor Roy Engelbert, the second by Supervisor Combs. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries as well. Okay. Resolution 2025-05. Roy. Oh, Jeff, I'm sorry. Yes, it's facilities, but it comes through the Finance Committee.
I'd like to introduce resolution number 2025-05 for approval. This resolution would approve moving up to $8,000 from our existing capital improvement highway reserve account to the capital outlay expense county road and bridge account. These funds are to be used for the engineering and draft design of the county road intersection E and State Highway 57. As to the intersection alignment, and I would move to approve this resolution.
Okay, there was a motion by Supervisor Miller, a second by Supervisor Vogel. Any questions regarding the project or the outlay to research the project, the work being done there? Okay. Okay, all in favor? Nope, we have to go to the voter board on this one. It's a 2/3 requirement. And that passes at a vote of 17 yes and 0 no with 4 absent. Okay, resolution 2025-06. Roy, would you introduce that?
I move to approve resolution number 2025-06, which is authorizing to hire a construction manager for the Door County Museum and Archives construction project. I'd like to ask our administrator and our department head, Wayne, to expound on that.
Sure. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to share just a presentation that we went through for the project at facilities, at highway and facilities. Again, I'll try to be somewhat brief, but we thought it was kind of the best way to share it. And we were going to kind of go through it with the packet, but it made sense just to kind of present it. So really, just quickly, as you know, we've been all over the map in terms of what we're going to try to do on this project. So just really quick, I'm just going to do a quick history overview, just so we're all on the same page, and then provide a status of those needs and maybe give a vision of how we think we would like to move forward. So again, I'm not going to cover the history as much. I think you've heard that before, but for those that may not be familiar, obviously we have the museum that was built in 1939. With the addition done in 1984 for the Pioneer Fire Company. This is a note, the fire company actually owns the equipment, just for reference, and it's a partnership that we have with the museum to display it. The archives were, I guess, traditionally always part of the museum, but it never really had the proper funding. If you will go back in old minutes, doing something with the museum goes all the way back to actually prior to 2000. And we've been working at it as a county board, as a county for many years. So we've done acquisitions on 434 Michigan Street in 2009. That was a residence there. Likewise in 442 Michigan in 2022. And then obviously we have the acquisition of the former Yonkers building in 2020. Again, back in terms of system history, we actually had a formal study done as known as the Groff study in 2011. Again, they actually put together a vision of what could have been done. And we are almost ready to move forward, but when we looked at the overall cost, the cost came in too high. And it was considered too costly at that $2.1 million in hindsight, right? Ballpark today, we're probably around that 4.5 million. The one thing just to kind of point out with this option is that with historic structures, you don't want your addition to be dominant or the primary feature of the historic structure. So this actually would not actually be constructed as you see it today, just based off new historic standards, but just wanted to make that as a reference point. Likewise, then we also, once we purchased the former Yonkers, we actually went through a process with a consultant at that time was Edinburgh Anderson. And they actually did a design on a building, but again, the project came in at 5.5 to 6.1, and again, considered too costly. And it also did not include any updates to the museum itself that we actually need on the building. The one thing that really drove up the cost at that time is we actually were including, we had the archives, but we also had what was called the YCC program in Joe's area for human services, which actually does not exist anymore. And we were actually looking at trying to preserve the entire building. So I think at that time, that scope of the project, again, had an impact on the overall cost of this project moving forward. In terms of that, though, even when they put together that study, they did look at options. And some of those options I just included just for a reference for you. So at one point, they talked about tearing off, in essence, the front of the building and keeping the back portion was an option. You could do like a parking lot, but actually utilizing the building in that sense. One option was obviously to tear the entire building down and do a building towards the back as a new construction. And there even was an option for tearing everything down and doing a new building towards the front as far as a new archives. Again, you can see the related costs that were those proposals at that point in time. Then we also, at that time, since the costs were so high, we actually commissioned a study that was, I guess, a follow-up from what's considered the HGA study. HGA was a firm that was working with the library on what their needs were. And we actually looked at it as almost like a campus study. And then from that study, there was a preferred option that was put together. Again, we looked at all of the information that we had in the past, but again, in essence, it showed, doing some type of an addition to our museum, where it included an addition for the archive and also the museum itself. And that was identified through the committees in terms of quote unquote a preferred option. And when they looked at that, again, through just generally boxing the renderings, the costs were somewhere around 4.6 in terms of having that. And then there was the question mark of what do you do with Yonkers? It could remain or it could be redeveloped, but that was all put together as part of that study. So then that brings us forward then. Well, we thought, okay, we have our path going forward. So we said, okay, let's look at that, at doing that. So then we brought on Dorschner. In that case, Dorschner kind of changed the path a little bit. Their thought process was to, instead of going what I would consider to the north, they decided to go around 4th, which included removing the existing Pioneer building and then doing the addition that way. And as you all know, it came in significantly higher than any of us projected, that $8.1 million. So again, so then what we did it for the committee levels, we went back and we kind of did let's take a look at what we have and make sure we're all on the same page. So first off, we looked at the museum itself. What do we need to do? So I asked Wayne to go through all of our stuff. We have it all in a computer system, and we kicked out all the maintenance that's either upcoming or needed for the facility itself, because we've not done some stuff. We deferred it mainly because we thought we'd be actually doing some work. But long story short, we have, let's just say, about $300,000 to $400,000 of work. We actually rounded it up to 500,000 just because we've been off on numbers, and we said, okay, let's put it up high so that way we know exactly what we have. Then I also asked, obviously we had Stephen at the time, but now we have Joe who's in the room tonight. I asked him again to go through all of the studies that have been done. Again, that's one of the areas I think we're probably the strongest in terms of what we understand in terms of our square footage and needs. But long story short, we did reanalyze all that and truth those numbers. And really based off that, we're saying that approximately 5,500 square feet would be the kind of our minimum of what we'd like to see in terms of our needs moving forward. So then what we did at the staff level, and this is what we had presented, is we looked at, I guess, really two options and going back to, I guess, some of the early studies. So obviously one option could be is where we, again, try to utilize the back of the Yonkers building, whether you take it back all the way or you try to save a little bit of the front, I guess that could be determined. But again, in essence, you'd say the museum would be there, but we try to build the space for storage and everything. And obviously there'd be a connection of some type, but again, they'd be two separate buildings. Again, under this option, you still need to make the updates to the museum, but that was one option that we considered. Again, we looked at, again, just some quick pros and cons. I won't read all of those to you. But the main idea is that you're working with an existing building, again, in our existing site. And again, we have sufficient square footage if we would use that. But again, obviously the cons is that we know that's an older building and there's a significant amount of work that needs to go into that. Under the option 2, we go back again to use what was part of that Groth and HGA concept. And actually, instead of looking at taking down the Pioneer, actually go back to that original study and actually put that, again, I'm calling it the North, and do a minimal update in terms of the building that way. Again, so we put together some of the pros and cons for that. Obviously, we're not using the Yonkers building, so that's a different discussion again. But again, we'd actually try to make it, again, as I mentioned before, it wouldn't be the prominent feature of the building. It'd just be, we're looking at it more utilitarian in terms of strictly storage and what our needs is, both for the museum and the archives. So we presented both of those. Again, we're doing the mock budgets that we did for the committee, but if we would do this, we think we could come in significantly under those previous bids in those dollars amount. But again, those are just our, at this level, best budgets. And again, we're not claiming that this is what we could hit far as a target. We need some help on that. And that's what kind of brings us to the resolution today and what we're talking about. So one of the things that we've missed on, I think, both times when we try to key this project up is what they consider a construction manager. In essence, what you do is you hire someone that is your representative, working with the architect and the trades to make sure that they're designing and proposing a building that's the most cost effective, right? So I can just give you some examples. So when we did the Dorschner proposal, you know, a lot of that stuff, for example, two things that really stood out quick when we had Bayland actually was one of the bidders review it. They said, well, why are you using all rock versus a split face? I could save you $1 million just on exterior features. They also talked about some of the fixtures instead of specifying high-end fixtures that you could have had an equivalent that performs just as well. So really by having a construction manager, you're actually spending money up front, but that construction manager actually represents you and it helps you guide you through that process. So when we had talked at the committee level, the idea would be is to hire a construction manager and let them look at those two options and put together cost figures and give us a recommendation of what they think is most viable and actually put together some alternatives for us to consider and then bring on an architect once it comes back to county board and we feel that we have a project that we think we can do on budget, right? So that's what we're thinking of doing in terms of moving forward. In terms of the process, I won't go through this slide specifically, but the reason why we're here today is that we'd like to bring on that construction manager and have them represent us and then start moving the project forward that way. And then that way we can hopefully have a project that one meets our needs, but then also something that we can accomplish with meeting our desired budget needs as well. So I know it's a little bit longer than just a basic discussion, but I wanted to provide the context of why we think and why this is here today. So again, what we're hoping to do, if you recall, we have a project process where we always come in and we check with the committee, but also county board at critical checkpoints. So we would still follow that process all the way through. So even if we proceed with this, we'd have someone come on board. They would do that analysis, but again, before we proceed hiring an architect, that would that process would come not only to the committee, but then to the county board to say, okay, we are satisfied with that work and we think we're on the right path. Now let's authorize the architect. That same process we go through, the architect does their work. They put together all the bid documents. They get that all set. They give you an estimated true cost. The construction manager be advising us all the way through that process. That comes again before the board, before we actually go out for bid. And then we can review that process again. Those bids come in, then you award it. So we have all these checkpoints just to make sure that we're actually comfortable all the way throughout the process. But I guess the resolution today is that first step. And I guess what we're trying to do is recommend hiring that construction manager, really so we can vet this project out and make sure that we design something that we need, but most importantly, also within our budget constraints. So hopefully I covered
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I'll take questions.
I think you've covered it very well, Ken. Yeah, this project, as you can tell, has gone through many county boards over the years, and we'd like to reach some conclusion as to what we're doing. I think it was very helpful when the committee took a walk through the museum and kind of took a visual of some of these options. And that's where the idea of going to the construction manager to get any further ideas and try to get some better cost controls on the project. So anyone else from the committee that would wish to comment to it, or Supervisor Hannibal?
Actually, two items. You mentioned the last rendition, you know, when that came through, you can't tell me how many people were disappointed that basically the fire department facade was going to go away, and the existing building. Again, it's ironic to take an existing building that is intended for museum activities that is now itself a building set that's worth keeping around, and then basically wipe it away. So that's why you're right. When we did that walkthrough again, especially after seeing yet another set of plans and looking at different approaches, it made me feel the same direction, that this makes more sense. My real question is, what is the process that's going to be used for choosing the construction manager?
So again, this for a construction manager, it's not, it wouldn't follow the exact same process because it's not strictly an RFP. In other words, it's not really, it's professional services. So in this case, we're looking for someone that we feel more comfortable with, who our representative is, versus the exact cost, although we'll be very cognizant of costs throughout it. In terms of the process, what we're hoping to do is we do have several firms that we would consider reaching out to, but we do a formal interview process, and we had, at the committee level, we'd asked it'd probably be like Wayne, myself, probably Sean, and then some of the committee members. We'd asked, obviously we want to maintain not doing a quorum, but I'd say probably up to 3 committee members that could sit on those interviews if they'd like. And then we'd go through and we'd select the professional to take us through that process.
And again, I'd just like to reiterate my interest of being a part of that group. Thank you.
Okay, questions from any other supervisor? Supervisor Gullickson, please.
Thank you. Like anything else, and I would assume there's contingencies in the contract if a manager is hired, where if the project doesn't go forward, there's all those, you know, technicalities and specialties involved in that process. Because that's a real possibility, although I hope it's not. Like you said, this has been going on for decades. It needs to get to fruition here, so.
Okay.
Yeah, just to formally answer that, but yeah, it'll be phased. So, and then just as we go through the phases, the construction manager rates would be tied to those phases. So that's correct.
Okay, Supervisor Rockwell.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to wonder if $9 million at this time would be even wise to think about. At this time in our world, we are really stretched thin. There's a lot of people out there that are hungry, and we can't even give affordable housing in our county for the workers that work here. So I don't understand how we would even think about or even discuss a $9 million project for a museum, which I love museums, but we have other museums that are owned and run by other people. So I think that maybe we should maybe kick this back for a while. I don't think, as far as I'm concerned, those slides that I just saw that you had, I have not seen those there. So I have no information to make my, other than my feelings of, $9 million being way too much for any project right now.
Okay. Just for clarification, not trying to advocate one way or another, but this for the project cost, again, that was that 8.1 was the Dorschner. That was way over budget. I think what the committee has really stressed, we have about $5.8 million set aside for the project. And even with that amount of money, I think the consensus of the county board is that we're hoping to spend much less than that in terms of the project cost itself. So again, when we put together even that slide deck, we were around that $4 million mark. Now, again, even that $4 million, I totally understand if you think that's not the right place to spend the money as well. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. We don't want to be near that $9 million mark. So the idea would be right now is we have the 5.8 actually budgeted and set aside. We'd actually try to spend less than that. And I think right now, the sweet spot, if I was going to say a sweet spot, just based off our discussions, the community members can correct me, but we're probably around that $4 million mark.
$4 million mark. As far as I'm concerned, it's just kind of crazy.
Okay.
We have plenty of things to do in Door County that we just can't afford $4 million for the people that live here. I mean, the people from everywhere else, that's great. And those are the people that go there. So maybe we could figure something else out. But buying that building from Yonkers for $500,000 without an inspection, after hearing that, I was very disappointed in the whole project itself, because to spend $500,000 on that lot and still have to clean that building off of it, I mean, that's an enormous amount of money. And it's just a downtown space. We are the county. I'm not really sure why the county needs to be downtown. Hopefully someday, because I own properties downtown, the downtown area will be a little bit bigger. A proposed condo project is going to be right on the water coming soon. And there'll be another nice place possibly for another project of that sort, not of a county project, that we really have other spaces that could possibly be used with other facilities to maybe possibly make a museum area, a museum district, a history district, something like that, rather than splitting everything up on different places. I just think there's a better way of this. I think that's too much money to spend, and I'm not going to support this at all. Thank you.
Okay. Any other supervisor would like to comment? Okay, seeing no indication. We do have a motion by Roy Engelbert and a second by Claire Markin to approve this resolution, 2025-06. All those in favor signify by aye. Okay, we need to go to the voter board. Okay. We'll go to the voter board on this one. And that passes with a vote of 16 yes, 1 no, and 4 absent. Okay, thank you. Resolution 2025-07, dealing with the Health and Human Services. Supervisor Norton, please.
I'll make the motion. Resolution number 2025-07, it's approval of multiple state grants awarded to the Health and Human Services Department. Packet's kind of explanatory, but I also saw Joe wandering around too, if anybody has questions about what's in there.
Yeah, I think there's enough in this resolution that I'd like to have Joe Krebsbach, Director, come up and explain it to us, please.
So if you could keep up the front, it's a little bit easier with the sound and video.
What we have here in front of you is 3 different grants. 2 of them are grants that we've received before. One is the TAD, or Treatment Alternative Grant. That's a grant that we use to run our treatment court program. We've got an additional funding for 2025 compared to what we've had over the last 4 years. The state had additional funds that we requested to try and enhance and use for sober living. We also have the Youth Diversion Grant, again, a grant that we've had for the last 5 years. This was a new 5-year round process that we were in. So we did the competitive process. Again, got an additional, I think about $80,000 additional compared to what we've had over the last 5 years in that grant. And then the third grant is a new grant for us. It's the SOAR grant. The SOAR grant comes from opioid funds, opioid settlement funds on the state side. And those funds are going to be used again, primarily to support sober living, hopefully also to allow us to bring in a contracted AODA counselor to work with folks. So all three of those grants, a little over 500,000. Two are ones that we've had before. One is brand new.
Okay, any questions of Joe while he's providing us information?
Again, just for reference, if I could, when he says the opioid settlement dollars, again, remember there's two pockets of money that's coming in. Ones that are payments directly to the municipality, or in this case, the county, that Joe has funds available for. And then there's also payments that the state has. And the state then can determine how would they use those funds. And that's what Joe's tapping into, is the state funds. We still have our funds that are coming in and are also will be used for other similar projects, but are not being used as this part of the. I just want to make sure they understood the difference.
Yeah, we put aside funds from those opioid funds earlier in 24. I guess it's 25 now, but so not earlier this year. But in 24, we put aside some of those funds to use for our sober living project. At that time, I had said we were going after additional grant funding. That's why we asked for additional money in our TAD grant and why we went after the SOAR grant, so that we wouldn't have to spend the local money that we had received and we could use that for other projects.
Okay, Supervisor Rockwell.
Yeah, Joe, just for a question, as of today, I'm just wondering how much on this project has been spent, and then also how many people have been served.
In the sober living project?
In the total sober living, including preparations and planning and everything else. I'm just trying to see how much, because I'm on that board, so I just want to make sure that, the cost effectiveness is proper.
Sure, most of the. What's that?
That's my mistake, right?
Oh, so far we've spent about 45,000 on the sober living project. So we used 15,000 to bring a consultant in and do some work on that project. And then we used some of our, again, grant funding to use as startup funds for that project. So to help secure the lease, buy all the furniture, that kind of stuff. So far we've had 3 individuals that have gone through the program or that have been in the program. It's been a rocky road, to be honest. It's been kind of up and down. I kind of anticipated that for the first year. It takes a while to get something like this going. So, but so far we've served 3. We've also served 2 males out of county because we don't have the mail bed. So, yep.
Okay, any other questions from any supervisor? Okay, seeing no indication, we have a motion by Supervisor Norton, second by Supervisor Shaw to approve resolution 2025-07. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, that carries. Okay. Resolution 2025-08, Supervisor Rubelard, would you, or maybe before I ask you to do that, should we have Jessica come up and explain all of these resolutions a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
But you can get the motion on the floor.
Yeah. Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do you want me to do all of them at once?
No,
or
go through each
one?
individually.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion for resolution number 2025-08 in support of Bertram Communications LLC application for BEAD funding for the broadband expansion in Door County.
Okay. I was thinking we'd go through each of these individually, but Jessica could explain, give one explanation, I guess, for all of the resolutions coming forward.
Morning. So just as a reminder, the resolutions that are before you are for us to support internet service providers in different areas throughout Door County to expand fiber to the premise services to our E911 locations throughout the county. Because of a request, we do have a map up today that is from the Wisconsin Broadband Office that shows an outline of project units. So that you have an idea with some of these resolutions that do have project unit numbers in them, some do not. That is because some of the internet service providers could provide me detailed information saying these are the specific project units that we will be bidding on, and some of them had not made decisions yet on those project units. In regard to Bertram Communications, their project units that they are looking at bidding on are generally, and please keep in mind that these project units do not stay and are not contained specifically to municipal boundaries. They are only contained to county boundaries. So the ones they are looking at are in the general area of Ephraim. And then there are what I would refer to and the broadband office will refer to as like straggler locations. So there's, I believe, 1 or 2 project units that are in the Bailey's Harbor area because they're in a contract agreement with Bailey's Harbor, and then a few in Clay Banks because they are in a contract with Clay Banks in a public-private partnership.
Okay, does anyone have any questions of Jessica for explanation for this resolution? And then the following resolutions will be coming up individually, but okay, Supervisor Enigal, you have a question.
Actually, two questions. So on the ride in this morning, though I understanding a lot of aspects of the federal and state funding aspects in that. There was a news report today that the president put a hold on grants and stuff like that. So I know a lot of these numbers, that dollar values in general towards broadband is come through the federal government. I'm just curious. I don't know when he announced that. I just heard it this morning. So if you've had no time to understand even the ramifications that might exist, but my question is there any, are we going to see any of this stuff that could possibly promised monies go away?
The best answer that I have for that, based on feedback from the Wisconsin Broadband Office, is that they have not had any feedback yet on it impacting BEAD funds specifically. There are other aspects of the IIJA that were impacted with those decisions, but not with broadband funding as of yet.
I guess, you know, I'm always looking at where monies are actually coming from.
Mhm.
Grants have always been an issue for me personally. I would appreciate it with the change in how our federal government is operating, that if there is any definitive answer for some kind of monies that somehow we're interacting with, it would be appreciated to be aware of those changes. I'm always been very opposed to last minute being told, hey, we were given $5 million. Turns out we have to supply 500,000 of that after all.
Mhm.
You know, so I would appreciate, even though we're not really putting a whole lot of money as a county, it's still
No.
useful.
Yeah.
To know. The other thing is I've been confused with this bead mapping aspects for a variety of reasons through the last few months. My understanding is, in theory, the way the internal operations of this county's build out is going is municipalities are agreeing to be provided by a provider, AT&T in the town of Egg Harbor. Ephraim area, when we say Ephraim, that can be Gibraltar, Ephraim, the village of Ephraim, or the town of Liberty Grove. I'm looking at part of that map and I'm seeing parts of what I think is Liberty Grove. So how does this cross over with their contracted agreement with XYZ company if the person asking for the BEAD funding is not that XYZ company?
So the broadband office specifically, all of these internet service providers that have applied to be approved applicants to bid in these auctions is what they are. Any provider can bid on any project unit. So locally, what we're doing here is not impacting decisions that the broadband office is going to be making 100%. Providers Bertram can apply, AT&T can apply, Frontier can apply. The aspects of that are that the broadband office has a due diligence to award the auction bid to the most affordable bid to make this funding go as far as it possibly can. So, you know, they can bid against each other. It's just going to come down to who is providing the most affordable bid for that. If Bertram wins a project unit that overlaps into Liberty Grove by a few locations, like 3, then they will serve and build out to those locations. That is not going to prevent Frontier into building out if that is their agreement with the town of Liberty Grove. And they could have, in essence, 2 providers to choose from at those specific locations.
So to clarify, in my mind, then, the BEAD program is a state-based function. Lack of a better term, arbitrarily laid out naturally. I mean, I've also made the same comment that electrical power lines don't know boundaries either. City of Sturgeon Bay runs a lot of non-City of Sturgeon Bay customers. If the BEAD grant is approved and there's 15 houses underneath that BEAD grant that is in another municipality who has a contract with a different provider, does the BEAD grant require that approved entity to build into that territory, even though in theory, like me and myself, I'm paying taxes towards a build out in Egg Harbor? It seems counterproductive for 2 entities to go out and be in the same neighborhood for 15 people, 15 houses.
Do you mean that, is there a requirement for that provider to build out as in the awarded provider or as in the
Yes,
public?
the awarded provider, because the public-private is a renegotiation.
Correct.
opportunity, right?
Well, if they bid on it and they're awarded that, then yes, they absolutely have to serve what they bid on and what they were awarded.
If I could just clarify
Yep.
this one thing. So I know what you're getting at, and that's why I think that's one of the things that the BEAD maps don't follow political boundaries, but again, our providers are working with municipalities. But you are going to see what I guess I would say that you are going to see potentially some competition for some of those BEAD areas along those competition corridors, right? But
Which are simply masses of groups.
right, but on the other hand, you have to also recall that if a provider is not in that entire township, they're not going to bid on all those BEAD units if they're not planning to provide that infrastructure, right? So I guess what we're seeing in Door County, this is a general statement, is that a lot of the ones that we're endorsing in these resolutions are ones that are matching up with the municipalities they're working at.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that some of these aren't hitting some of the fringes and creeping up a little bit? They could be, in terms of that, because they don't have all their units. But in general, across the state, you're going to see a lot of that. But I guess in Door County, what we're seeing is that a lot of them are staying within their
Their conversations and partnerships
Their
is
partnership,
what
right.
we're seeing. The resolutions that are written today are written because they are in support of and in line with those public-private partnerships that we have been working on for years.
And I draw back to the Charter and Clark's Lake issue where
Yep.
Charter was Sevastopol. And I somehow had to remind people that half of Clark's Lake is in Jacksonport. So there was no communications, and logic dictates a single entity grab that entire area. That makes paperwork sense. Then the last question, and maybe that helps explain this, on the page 30, the last resolution for connecting holding it to LLC,
Which is Brightspeed. That is just their
Is-
legal name.
is that the last one though?
The last
I
one
don't
was
think so. The
Net
very last one.
LLC.
The very last one, sorry.
Net LEC LLC.
Yes.
Mhm.
That one. So then that's an entity who is intending to do wireless solutions.
Licensed fixed wireless if those project units are not awarded and picked up in round 1 or round 2.
So it's a fill in the blank of not being qualifying entities in the first place. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. It
Sure.
is still wireless.
Okay, you go ahead.
Jess, if you can just also just provide some background relative to what we're doing here as a county. As part of this process, there's scoring that goes on that helps folks from a bidding process. Can you just outline the value that the county brings in terms of helping these communities from the scoring process?
Yes, so the auction process is going to have, much like any grant round, there will be a scoring process. And with support from resolutions and our letters of support, there can be an additional 12 points that all of these ISPs would receive in their applications for any project units. So if there is an additional ISP that is going to bid against them, what it's going to come down to, if they're very close in the cost analysis, the points are what are going to award those auction bids and awards. So we and our municipalities and some of our community anchor institutions like economic development, United Way, school districts are all providing letters to raise the scoring in those application reviews to help with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jessica, would I be fair to say that any of these BEAD grants are going to be used to award dollars towards those that are unserved or underserved?
Yes, that
So
is.
that if there is a contract with any municipality to serve people in that town, that will be part of that decision.
Yeah, the focus of BEAD funding is specifically to serve unserved and underserved locations in rural areas.
Town, there's no such thing.
Right. But that's somewhat of an answer to what you were asking.
Still
but-
doesn't exist.
Nancy. Sorry. Right. Yeah, Nancy made the motion. I apologize. Okay.
Thank you,
Roy.
Mr. Chair. I want to appreciate your map that you have up there because those little octagon squares or hexagon squares, wherever they are, that's the project areas. So now we can see around Ephraim that there's probably a dozen project areas, but right now Bertrand is only going to bid on 6 of them.
They're in, and they're not all in Ephraim. So what you're looking at there definitely borders into Liberty Grove. Ephraim has, I believe, the impact was about 3 that are within the Ephraim municipal boundaries, and the rest are going to fall into Liberty Grove. And then the ones for Bertram specifically that they have also are some stragglers in Bailey's Harbor and Claybanks, and then 2 that are actually on Chambers Island because of their partnership with Gibraltar to serve Chambers Island with fixed wireless.
Thank you. And in the future, would you zero in on what they're talking about? I appreciate that, just like you did just now.
Okay. Okay, this was, I think, some good general discussion. We will go back to the motion by Supervisor Rublard, a second by Supervisor Voigt to approve resolution 2025-08. Are there any questions specific to that resolution? If not, all those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Okay. Then resolution 2025-09. Nancy, could you do that one as well, please?
I make a motion to approve resolution 2025-09 in support of the Wisconsin Bell LLC doing business as AT&T Wisconsin application for BEAD funding for the broadband expansion in the town of Nassau and the village of Egg Harbor.
Okay. Are there any questions from any supervisors regarding this resolution? Supervisor Zettel.
Oh, sorry. I was doing the math at the same time.
That's all right. Yeah, I'll have a comment on a couple of these just so as a heads up. Just, as a broadband chair committee, I get to see a lot of how the sausage, if you will, is made through the hard work of all the folks in the municipalities that are leading this effort. So I just want to acknowledge the Village of Egg Harbor, their broadband committee for their work as they've, if you will, kind of scrambled to go from Frontier to AT&T to serve that village. And I also want to acknowledge the leadership of John Kaloji for all his hard work in spearheading the work in the town of Nassau. So thanks to those folks.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Markin.
Forgive me, Jessica, just a quick question.
Mhm.
Where's the ledger that tells us which color, what each color represents?
The colors are just different so that you can see the difference. Because if Ken were to click, if you want to click on one of those, Ken, what's going to happen with that project unit is it's going to bring up the number on that project unit. You go through, it'll tell you how many locations are in there. And the colors that are all near each other are basically kind of like a pod of project units that they would like to see together.
I see. So it's not providers.
No, it's not. It's the project units that the Wisconsin Broadband Office has created because it's basically all those brown hexagons that are close to each other are going to have a total number of locations in them, and they would like to see the provider bid on that as a whole.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I'll go to Matt Swaffy real quick. Let's do so.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments to this? Okay, otherwise we have a motion by Supervisor Rublard, second by Supervisor Shaw to approve resolution 2025-09. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. Resolution 2025-10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2025-10 in support of Connect Holding 2 LLC application for BEAD funding for broadband expansion in Southern Door County.
Okay, any questions on this resolution? Again, Supervisor Zettel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this one, I'd like to thank, this was an interesting one because we had a collaboration for the last, couple of years with the towns of Brussels, Union, Gardner, and Forestville, working on broadband. So I congratulate them on their efforts. And I want to specifically thank John Cook, who kind of shepherded that entire, if you will, collaboration when they went to initial funding. So never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that someone that had a career in law enforcement would be a good broadband coordinator in that area, but he's been exemplary, exhibiting the professionalism, perseverance, tenacity, and sense of public service that we all appreciate. So thank you to John and the folks in that collaboration.
I would have to second that. He did say this is the last time he will be serving the public. Yeah, no more asks.
Okay, we do have a motion by Supervisor Rublard and a second by Supervisor Roy Engelbert to approve resolution 2025-10. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Okay. Just two more of these. Resolution 2025-11.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion to approve resolution 2025-11 in support of Frontier North in Ions Incorporated application for BEAD funding for broadband expansion in the town of Liberty Grove.
Okay, Supervisor Zettel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I want to highlight the work of Kirk Scattergood, who's the chair of the Broadband Committee in the town of Liberty Grove, and also to Jody Benzel, who both has championed a lot of work in that town. She's a subject matter expert in networking relative to her professional life, and she also serves on the county's Broadband Committee. So I just want to thank Jody and Kirk for all their efforts to help Liberty Grove through their process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay. We have a motion by Supervisor Rublard, a second by Supervisor Combs to approve resolution 2025-11. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. And the final resolution 2025-12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to approve resolution 2025-12 in support of Net LEC LLC application for BEAD funding for the broadband expansion in Door County, Wisconsin.
Okay, again, any questions, comments? Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Rubelard, a second by Supervisor Jean-Gord. All in favor of approval signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes by voice vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Aye, on all of this funding.
okay. We have no ordinances to consider today. Have nothing under new business. Oral committee reports. Any questions of committees? Review of committee minutes. And review of vouchers, claims, and bills. Hearing no questions. Next county board meeting will be rescheduled because of the legislative days in Madison. So the proposed meeting date is Thursday, February 27th at 10 a.m. We're open for adjournment. And we have a motion by Supervisor Shaw, a second by Supervisor Vogel. All in favor of adjourning signify by aye. Opposed, we stand adjourned. Thank you.